Far beyond the crowded trade lanes of the inner systems, on the quiet edge of human space, the colony of New Dawn lived under a sky that most of the galaxy had already forgotten. It was not a military world, and it was not a place built for war. It was a peaceful human colony made of farms, mining fields, research domes, and small cities surrounded by silver plains and blue mountain ridges. Families had come there to start over. Retired soldiers had come there to find peace. Scientists had come there to study the rare crystal veins deep beneath the planet's crust. Every morning, cargo shuttles rose from the surface like tiny sparks, and every night, children watched distant stars through the clear atmosphere and dreamed of what waited beyond them. Among those people was Captain Jiho Park, a former fleet officer who had left Earth's Navy after 20 years of service. He now worked as head of New Dawn's Small Defense Command, a force so light that most larger worlds would have laughed at it. He had only a handful of patrol ships, some old orbital cannons, and a few hundred trained men and women. Still, Jiho took his duty seriously, because he knew frontier worlds always looked peaceful right before history changed. In the colony's central city, Mira Han, a communications officer with calm eyes and steady hands, worked in the planetary relay tower. She had grown up on New Dawn and loved the place with all her heart. Nearby, Dr. Yuna Lee led a research team studying deep core energy patterns, while Engineer Dae Kim kept the shield grid running with machines that were older than some of the colonists themselves. It was an ordinary day when the first warning came, and that was what made it terrifying. A cargo pilot returning from the outer sensor belt reported ghost signals in the dark beyond the moon. At first, Jiho thought it was another pirate sweep or a faulty sensor echo. New Dawn sat close to disputed territory, and strange readings were not uncommon. But when Dae checked the defense net, he found something that made his blood run cold. 12 long-range satellites had gone silent at the same time. Not damaged, not jammed, destroyed. Jiho ordered all patrol craft to launch at once. Mira sent priority messages to the orbital platforms. Sirens began to ring across New Dawn cities, low and distant at first, like thunder rolling across empty land. Most civilians had never heard a real attack alarm before. They paused in streets, fields, and market squares, confused more than afraid. Then the sky changed. Above the upper atmosphere, stars vanished behind moving shadows. Not one or two ships, not a raider pack, a fleet, massive, black, and silent as death. Their hulls were jagged like blades, and their engines glowed with a deep red light that painted the clouds in blood-colored streaks. The ships belonged to the Verex Dominion, one of the harshest alien powers near the frontier, a species feared across the outer sectors for its cruelty and hunger for territory. The Dominion had long claimed the region around New Dawn, but they had never formally challenged the colony. No warning had come, no message had been sent. No declaration of war had been given. Jiho stared at the tactical screen as more and more contacts appeared. Battleships, assault carriers, siege cruisers. Enough firepower to erase a world. How many? Mira asked, her voice almost breaking as she watched the numbers climb. Jiho did not answer right away. He already knew the truth would sound impossible. Too many, he finally said. Get every civilian underground. Now, the colony reacted with sudden panic. Parents ran for shelters carrying children in their arms. Emergency transports raced through the streets. Miners abandoned their drills and fled for the bunkers beneath the surface. In the hospitals, doctors began moving patients below ground. Yuna left her lab and rushed with her team toward the nearest shelter tunnel. But she kept looking back at the sky as if she still could not believe what she was seeing. New Dawn had no time. The Verex fleet moved into firing position with cold precision, as if they had planned every second. Then the first strike came. A single beam of white fire dropped from orbit and hit the northern defense platform. The station did not explode all at once. It broke apart in glowing pieces, raining across the upper atmosphere like burning metal rain. A second later, the bombardment began. Blue-white plasma bolts slammed into the colony shield grid. The air itself seemed to scream. The shield dome flashed across the planet's surface like lightning trapped inside glass. Dae stood at the control core, shouting orders over rising alarms, his hands moving across dead screens and overloaded systems. "They're hitting all shield nodes at once," he yelled. "They know the grid pattern." Jiho heard that and understood something horrible. This was not a random attack. This was planned. Someone had studied New Dawn. Someone had mapped every weakness. The second barrage struck harder. Shield towers across the continent burst into fire. Power relays blew apart. In the capital city, windows shattered across entire districts. People fell in the streets as shockwaves rolled through the buildings. Mira gripped her console as sparks erupted around her. "Emergency channel to Earth is open," she said. "But interference is rising." Jiho looked at the orbital display. His patrol ships had reached the enemy line, tiny human vessels against monstrous alien warships. They fought anyway. He watched Lieutenant Sun Choi lead 3 corvettes into a suicide run against a Verex destroyer. Missiles hit the alien ship's shield and did almost nothing. A second later, red beams cut through 2 human ships like paper. The third kept going. Sun's corvette slammed into the destroyer's weapon array, buying only a few seconds before it vanished in the blast. Jiho closed his eyes for one breath, then opened them again. There was no time to mourn. "Fire all orbital guns," he ordered. The old cannons answered, launching heavy slugs into the sky. One Verex frigate lost its engines and drifted away in flames, but it was like throwing stones at a mountain. The Dominion fleet answered with full orbital saturation. The shield finally broke. It shattered in a flash so bright the whole horizon turned white. Then New Dawn began to die. Bombardment lines carved through the outer farming zones first, turning green fields into black glass. Mining towns vanished under firestorms. Landing ports exploded one after another, destroying evacuation ships before they could lift off. A school shelter near the Western District collapsed when the ground shook under repeated strikes. In the capital, towers fell into streets choked with smoke and dust. The peaceful world that had taken decades to build was being erased in minutes. Yuna and the civilians around her reached an underground shelter, but the tunnel entrance behind them caved in when a strike hit nearby. The lights flickered. Children cried in the dark. She held one little girl close while trying to stay calm, though her own hands were shaking. Above them, the ground trembled again and again as the sky rained fire. In command, Mira fought through static to keep the long-range relay alive. Every other system was failing. Half the tower was burning. One of her operators was dead at his station. Jiho had blood on his face from falling debris, but he stayed at the tactical table until the final orbital cannon went silent. "We can't hold," Day said, coughing through smoke. "The bunkers might survive if they stop here." Jiho looked up at the display. The Verex ships were changing formation. He had seen that pattern before long ago in war simulations. It was not a siege pattern. It was extermination. "They're not stopping," he said quietly. The next phase began with troop drops. Black landing craft pierced the clouds and descended toward the surviving districts. The Dominion did not want prisoners. They wanted witnesses dead. Jiho knew if the enemy reached the shelters, everyone underground would be hunted out one by one. He turned to the few soldiers still standing around him, men and women with burned uniforms and tired eyes. "Delay them," he said. "Every minute matters." No one argued. They all knew this was the end. Outside the command complex, human defenders formed a last line in the shattered streets. Sergeant Nari-O led civilians through a side tunnel while rifle fire echoed in the distance. Jiho took a pulse rifle from a fallen Marine and joined the defense himself. The battle on the ground was desperate and brutal. Human troops fought from rubble, transit stations, and broken walls. They destroyed 2 enemy walkers with improvised charges. They held crossroads long after they should have fallen back. They died buying seconds. In the relay tower, Mira forced the final emergency channel through the jamming field. "Earth Command, this is New Dawn Actual, priority black," she said, her voice cracking as the building shook. "We are under full orbital and ground assault by the Verex Dominion. Civilian casualties catastrophic. Defense grid destroyed. This is an unprovoked attack. Repeat, unprovoked attack. Static swallowed half her words. Consoles burst behind her. She looked at the last live camera feed from the surface and saw the colony burning from horizon to horizon. Then a signal appeared from one surviving bunker line. Audio only. A child's voice. Small. Terrified. Did Earth hear us? Mira froze. For a moment, she could not speak. Tears filled her eyes as another explosion rocked the tower. She opened the channel wider and sent everything. Battle logs, visual records, casualty estimates, and the child's voice. Across the stars toward Sol. Yes, she whispered, though she did not know if the message would ever arrive. Earth will hear. Moments later, the relay tower took a direct hit. The upper structure vanished in a wall of fire, but the transmission had already gone out. On the surface, Jiho and the last defenders were forced back to the colony memorial square, surrounded by smoke, falling ash and ruined buildings. Enemy dropships descended all around them. He looked once toward the sky, where the red glow of alien engines covered the stars, and then he looked at the burning streets of the world he had sworn to protect. New Dawn was gone. The colony had fallen. The Verex Dominion believed they had sent a message to all humanity, that humans were weak, that frontier lives meant nothing, that one peaceful colony could be erased without consequence. But as the final distress signal crossed the void toward Earth, carrying the proof of massacre and the voice of a frightened child, deep within the command halls of Sol, old war systems that had slept for generations began to wake, and before the ashes of New Dawn had even cooled, the first silent alarms of human vengeance started to ring across Earth. The final signal from New Dawn crossed the void like a wound carried through the stars, and when it reached Earth, it did not arrive in a crowded newsroom or a public channel first, but in the deepest command vault beneath the Pacific Defense Ring, where the oldest emergency systems in human history still listened in silence. Admiral Jisoo Kong was standing in the central war chamber when the transmission appeared, and at first the room only heard static, broken alarms, and the sound of collapsing metal. But then Mira Han's voice came through, weak and full of pain, reporting the destruction of the colony, the orbital bombardment, the civilian deaths, and the unprovoked attack by the Verex Dominion. Then came the final audio from the bunker line, the tiny voice of a child asking one simple question. Did Earth hear us? No one in the room moved. Officers who had served in border wars, men and women who had seen pirate raids, insurgencies, and cold political betrayals, stood frozen as the message ended in fire. Jisoo did not speak for several long seconds. Her face did not change, but everyone around her could feel the air in the chamber turn heavy, like a storm pressing down on the ocean. Then she quietly said, "Lock the room." Massive blast doors sealed shut around the chamber. Civilian links were cut. External communications were restricted. The oldest protocol in the Human Defense Network activated with a sound most officers had never heard before. A low metallic tone that echoed through the walls like the awakening of something ancient. It was called Black Horizon, a war authority designed for one purpose only: the destruction of a human colony by a foreign power without warning. On the surface of Earth, people were still waking, commuting, studying, eating breakfast, or beginning night shifts in orbital stations when the first classified alerts moved through military channels. Within 1 hour, every fleet command in the Sol system had received the same order. Stand by for emergency assembly, full readiness, no public statement. Within 2 hours, the footage from New Dawn was reviewed by the World Defense Council. Entire cities burned. Shelter corridors collapsed. Human defenders dying in the streets. The Verex fleet firing on evacuation ports. There was no room for debate. It was not an accident. It was not a border mistake. It was massacre. President Hanul Ryu sat at the head of the emergency session in the orbital government citadel above Earth, surrounded by military chiefs, planetary ministers, and security analysts. He was known across the inner systems as a calm and careful leader, a man who believed peace was stronger than fear, but even he could not hide the anger in his eyes as the final recording played again. Around him, some civilian ministers demanded immediate public retaliation, while others warned that the Galactic Council would call for restraint. One advisor from the diplomatic corps said the council had already sent a preliminary message urging patience and an investigation, claiming that regional misunderstandings should not trigger war. At that, the room turned cold. General Unipark, commander of Earth's planetary defense network, leaned forward and said in a voice sharp as steel, "They vaporize children, hospitals, and shelters. If the Council wants an investigation, they can investigate the wreckage after we are done." Yet even then, Earth did not move with panic. That was what made it terrifying. The human reaction was not loud. It was controlled. Beneath the cities of Earth, deep under the red plains of Mars, inside the frozen industrial vaults of Titan, and far beyond Pluto in dark hidden shipyards that no foreign scanner had ever mapped, old reactors came alive. Entire construction docks that had appeared dormant for decades began to glow with blue-white power. Buried in forgotten asteroid belts, sealed hangars opened like iron flowers in vacuum. Across human space, a secret that only the highest levels of command had known for generations finally stepped out of the shadows. Humanity had never fully trusted the peace of the galaxy. Long ago, after the first contacts, after the first treaties, after the first time a council species smiled in public while arming pirates in secret, Earth had adopted a doctrine so extreme that many later leaders had called it paranoid. The doctrine had a simple rule. If the galaxy ever chose to exterminate humanity, humanity must be ready to answer in one strike so overwhelming that no second attack would ever be possible. For 80 years, while the Galactic Council mocked human caution and counted Earth as a useful but minor power, hidden fleets had been built in silence. Civilian shipping records were altered. Shipyard output was disguised as industrial transport production. Retired drydocks were secretly expanded under layers of false registry. Entire classes of warships were built in fragments across different systems, then assembled in remote void stations far from trade routes. The result was a reserve fleet beyond imagination. In the underground war chamber, Jisu stood before a wall-sized tactical display as secure feeds opened one after another. Mars Defense Shipyard, active. Titan Deep Forge, active. Sol Outer Belt Arsenal, active. Helios Black Dock, active. Lunar Shadow Harbor, active. Then came the count, rising with each confirmation. 12,000 ready combat hulls in Earth orbit. 43,000 in Mars reserve sectors. 70,000 from the outer belt. 120,000 carrier and escort groups from Titan lines. Then more. More than any analyst in the Galactic Council had ever guessed. More than any spy report had even come close to imagining. As the total climbed past 100,000, then 200,000, then 400,000, silence spread through the room again. By the time all reserve sectors reported in, the number was impossible. 700,000 warships, battleships, missile cruisers, carrier groups, drone tenders, siege dreadnoughts, electronic warfare vessels, marine assault ships, and autonomous strike formations designed for sector-wide conflict. Not a fleet, a civilization-level answer. President Hanul looked at the display for a long time, then turned to Jisu. "If we release this," he said quietly, "the galaxy will never see us the same way again." Jisu did not look away from the numbers. "They already decided how they see us," she replied. New dawn was the result. While the military prepared, Earth itself began to feel the shift. Public networks received only fragments at first, restricted traffic, orbital launch windows closing, reserve crews recalled, supply corridors redirected. Families saw old veterans leave dinner tables without explanation. Shipyard workers were escorted into sealed zones. Freight lanes were cleared by armed patrols. Then the government released the footage. Not all of it, but enough. Enough for every citizen on Earth, Mars, Luna, and the inner colonies to see what had happened to New Dawn. Enough to hear the child's voice asking if Earth had heard. The reaction was immediate and unlike anything in living memory. Crowds gathered in city squares, not to riot, but to stand in silence. Candles appeared in millions of windows. Former soldiers who had not worn uniforms in decades reported to reserve offices before they were called. Recruitment stations overflowed. Families with relatives on New Dawn flooded aid channels and emergency lines, begging for news, begging for justice. Across social networks, one sentence spread faster than any official statement. Earth heard. In the Galactic Council capital, the response was confusion mixed with fear. Council delegates had expected the usual human behavior: formal protest, demands for sanctions, perhaps a defensive mobilization. Instead, long-range observatories near Seoul began detecting energy signatures that made their analysts think instruments were malfunctioning. One council sensor station reported abnormal mass deployment from multiple human sectors. Another revised it to extreme military activity. Then a third station watching a far outer lane near Neptune sent a panicked emergency report when it saw an entire dark region of space fill with moving contacts. At first, they counted a few hundred, then thousands. Then the software failed because the number of simultaneous warp signatures exceeded known battle modeling limits. Council envoy Sora Bay, one of Earth's representatives stationed at the Galactic capital, was summoned to an emergency chamber where alien delegates demanded explanations. Some accused Earth of escalating a local conflict. Some warned of sanctions. Some insisted the Verex Dominion should be allowed to provide its version of events. Sora stood alone at the center of the chamber while the holographic display still showed burning images from New Dawn. When one senior delegate coldly referred to the massacre as an unfortunate territorial correction, Sora's calm expression finally hardened. She activated a secure projection and flooded the chamber with full battlefield evidence. Verex attack vectors, shield suppression patterns, civilian target maps, troop deployment on shelters, and the final extermination order recovered from Dominion battle signals. The chamber fell silent. Then she delivered Earth's only formal response. Humanity requested peace, she said. Humanity respected your laws. Humanity buried its dead and kept building. New Dawn was not a border dispute. It was an execution. If this council will not act, Earth will. Before any delegate could answer, she cut the transmission and walked out. Back in Seoul, the final war session began. Operation Iron Horizon, a contingency that had existed only on paper for generations, was officially authorized. Fleet groups received attack corridors. AI battle nets synchronized across millions of systems. Old admirals were recalled. Reserve captains were given command of ships they had never expected to see. Jiho Park's service file from New Dawn was marked Kia, but his last tactical data became part of the opening war doctrine. Mira Han's final transmission was played before every command crew assigned to the first assault waves. In a launch bay above Mars, Commander Naricho stood before the crew of a heavy carrier and repeated the words now spreading across human space. We do not fire first in anger. We fire last in memory. Then the launch order came. Across Earth orbit, vast armored hulls began moving from shadowed dock rings into open space. Carrier doors opened. Drone swarms rose in glittering clouds. Missile barges aligned with deep space tugs. Battleships powered main reactors that had not run at full combat output in decades. On the Moon, buried launch shafts opened across ancient defense fields. On Titan, 3 hidden fleets emerged from under false industrial signatures and formed up in disciplined silence. Along the outer dark, black dreadnought lines slipped free from shipyards that foreign spies had believed were dead metal graveyards. The stars around human space changed shape as 700,000 warships formed into layered waves so large that civilian telescopes across nearby systems could see their engine trails like artificial dawns. On Verex frontier listening posts, operators noticed the first spikes and laughed, thinking Earth was sending an angry task force. Then more contacts appeared. Then more. One commander ordered a sensor recalibration, convinced the array was broken. When the count passed 50,000, laughter stopped. When it passed 100,000, emergency codes began flashing. When the first complete fleet image resolved, even hardened Verex officers stared in disbelief at the impossible wall of steel moving toward them. At the center of the human formation, aboard the flagship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Jisoo Kong stood beneath the tactical dome as the full strength of Earth's hidden armada aligned for war. She looked at the star map, at the red-marked remains of New Dawn, at the Verex border sectors, and at the path that would soon carry human vengeance into the heart of enemy space. Then she gave the order the galaxy would remember forever. All fleets, she said, her voice calm and cold. Advance. A moment later, 700,000 human warships lit their drives at once, and across the stars, the first witnesses who saw the moving storm of Earth's wrath could only whisper the same terrified truth. This was not a fleet coming for battle. This was a civilization coming to end a war before the enemy even understood it had begun. When 700,000 human warships moved as one, the galaxy did not first understand what it was seeing, because no species in living memory had ever gathered so much firepower into a single coordinated force. At the edge of Sol, the fleet stretched across the darkness like a second night sky made of steel. Engine flares burning in endless rows, carrier lights blinking like distant stars, and heavy dreadnoughts drifting forward with the slow certainty of mountains. Civilian ships across nearby sectors went silent as the armada passed. Trade routes were cleared in panic. Long-range sensors overloaded and had to be reset again and again because the contact count kept rising beyond known military models. In the Galactic Council capital, analysts tried to convince themselves the readings were false, but every new scan only confirmed the same impossible truth. Earth had not launched a task force, and it had not sent a symbolic response. Earth had released a war machine that had been hidden for generations. At the center of that storm, aboard the flagship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Jisoo Kong stood under a wide tactical dome filled with layered star maps and glowing red enemy markers. Around her, officers moved with disciplined focus, but even among veterans there was a weight in the air that felt almost sacred. This was not just another campaign. This was the answer to New Dawn. Commander Naricho, now leading the carrier screen on the forward left flank, reviewed strike packages with calm precision, while Captain Hannah Lim managed the fleet's deep-range communication net, linking thousands of battle groups through encrypted AI relays that pulsed like a living nervous system across the void. Jisoo did not raise her voice when the first border reports came in. Varric's outposts are activating defense posture, Hannah said. They still think this is a limited advance. Jisoo looked at the enemy borderline projected ahead, a chain of fortress stations and patrol sectors built around a narrow hyperspace corridor called the Kari's Gate, the most important choke point between human frontier space and the inner Varric's dominion. Every war game had predicted the same thing. If Earth ever retaliated, the Varric's would mass their fleets there, trusting the gate's gravity well and mine screens to break any assault. But every war game had also assumed Earth would send perhaps a few thousand ships, not hundreds of thousands. They built their defense for fear, Jisoo said quietly. They never planned for consequences. The first human assault waves dropped from hyperspace in perfect formation near the outer range of Kari's Gate, and the Varric's defenders reacted with immediate aggression. Red-lit alien battleships swung into firing arcs. Fortress cannons along the asteroid bastions opened up with lances of plasma so bright they painted the void in flashing storms. Mine clusters erupted forward, each one releasing swarms of smart kill interceptors meant to shred incoming fighters and missiles. For a few seconds it looked like the Varric's line might actually hold. Then Earth's opening move began. Human electronic warfare ships, hidden behind the first battleship screens, activated synchronized signal ghosts across 3 sectors at once. Suddenly the Varric's targeting net saw phantom fleets where none existed, false warp signatures to the north lane, fake missile storms on the southern edge, and entire carrier formations appearing behind their own line. Fortress commanders split their fire. Mine clusters detonated too early against empty space. 2 Varric's cruisers launched at decoys and exposed their flanks. Confusion window, 9 seconds, Hannah reported. Enough, Jisoo answered. The real attack hit like a hammer from all directions. Human missile barges, far behind the main line, unleashed the first saturation strike. Tens of thousands of heavy missiles burst forward in layered clouds, each wave shielded by electronic chaff and decoy drones. Varric's point defense lit up in a frantic red lattice, filling the void with explosions, but there were simply too many targets. The first fortress lost its forward shield grid. A second later, 3 human railgun dreadnoughts fired from extreme range, their kinetic rounds crossing the battlefield faster than most Varric's crews could track. One slug punched through a command tower and split the station's spine. Another shattered a destroyer clean in half. The third hit a shield generator built into an asteroid bastion, turning the whole rock into a spinning field of fire and metal. On the forward edge, Naricho's carriers opened their launch bays. Not with a few squadrons, but with oceans of drones and strike craft. Thousands of autonomous fighters poured into the battle, each one linked to fleet AI, moving in swarms that flowed around enemy fire like water. Human pilots flew among them, using the drones as cover while slipping through broken defense gaps. Varex officers who had spent their careers fighting small border fleets suddenly found themselves drowning in targets. Entire fire control systems crashed under the load. The first Varex capital line, meant to hold for hours, began collapsing in minutes. Still, the Dominion was not weak. Their border fleets fought with savage discipline. Massive assault cruisers rammed forward through the wreckage, ignoring losses, trying to punch into the center of the human formation before the full armada could deploy. One such cruiser, the size of a city block, broke through the missile haze and fired a wide plasma sweep that tore apart 2 human escorts and crippled a destroyer wing. Captain Du Yun, commanding the heavy cruiser Iron Veil, saw the breach and did not wait for orders. He drove his ship directly across the assault lane, taking the next plasma strike on reinforced armor while his gunners opened with broadside coil batteries. The Iron Veil shook so hard that half its internal lights died, but its shells smashed through the alien cruiser's bridge armor. Before the Varex ship could recover, a human boarding torpedo punched into its engine core. Marine teams cut through its corridors in brutal close combat, and seconds later the cruiser's reactor blew, lighting the entire sector in white fire. Gap sealed. Du Yun reported, blood running from a cut above his eye, as if he had merely adjusted formation. Jisu gave only a small nod. There would be time to remember names later. The battle widened. What the Varex had believed would be a single chokepoint engagement turned into a three-dimensional collapse as Earth executed multivector warp insertion across the whole Kari sector. Hidden strike groups emerged behind the fortress chain, using microjumps so precise that many alien crews thought the humans had somehow learned to appear inside their perimeter walls. Siege dreadnoughts targeted defense nodes. Marine assault ships latched onto orbital guns. Carrier swarms overwhelmed logistics hubs. Even as the front line fought, deeper human waves continued arriving, tens of thousands at a time, expanding the battle until it covered more than 1 million kilometers of contested space. Far behind the main engagement, Varex Command attempted to reroute reserve fleets from nearby sectors, but Earth had anticipated that too. Autonomous hunter groups, sent ahead through dark lanes before the main assault, ambushed those reinforcements as they tried to enter the gate, trapping them in kill boxes of missiles and railgun fire. The Varex Border Command, once proud and confident, began breaking apart under the speed of the human offensive. On one fortress station, a senior Varex officer ordered all civilian traffic in nearby moons to be used as shield clutter to confuse human targeting. When that transmission was intercepted, Jisu's expression hardened further. "Confirm military lock only," she said. "We are not them." That was the difference every watching species began to notice. Earth's firepower was terrifying, but it was controlled. Human fleets did not glass moons. They did not strike refugee stations. They did not erase civilian habitats simply because they were in the way. Instead, they cut apart military infrastructure with ruthless accuracy, as if every shot had been planned years in advance. This shocked many neutral observers more than the scale of the assault itself. The humans were not raging blindly. They were angry, yes, but they were disciplined, and that made them far more frightening. In the council capital, Envoy Sora Bay watched the battle feed with a room full of silent alien delegates. No one spoke now of territorial correction. No one mentioned sanctions. The images were too clear. The Varex had struck a colony. Earth had answered with a level of organized force the galaxy had never imagined. Some delegates looked horrified. Some looked relieved. A few looked as if they had just realized their own secret plans against humanity had suddenly become very dangerous ideas. Back at Kari's Gate, the final fortress line began to fail. The largest station, a rotating citadel known as Black Spire, still held with heavy shield arrays and enough weapons to destroy a small fleet. It became the last real anchor of the Varex defense. Jisu studied it for only a moment before giving a new command. "Open Corridor 7. At once, 3 damaged human battleships shifted aside, revealing a narrow lane that had been deliberately protected through the chaos of battle. From deep in the rear, a class of ship the Varex had not yet identified moved forward, an Earth siege platform named Silent Hammer, long, black, and built around a spinal weapon so large it required its own reactor banks. The Varex tried to retarget, but it was too late. Silent Hammer fired once. The beam did not flash like plasma or explode like a missile. It was a concentrated spear of blue-white force that crossed the void in silence and struck Black Spire's central shield core. For one impossible second, the station held. Then the shield collapsed inward, and the citadel split open from center to edge like a cracked planet. The remaining fortress guns went dark. Across the whole sector, Varex ships began sending fragmented retreat codes. Some tried to run. Some fought on in blind fury. Some simply died where they stood, surrounded by the wreckage of the defense line they had believed unbreakable. Human Marines stormed the surviving command stations and seized tactical archives before self-destruct systems could wipe them. On one shattered Varex command carrier, a boarding team led by Lieutenant Era Shin fought deck by deck through burning corridors until they reached the central data vault. There, amid dead officers and emergency lights, they found encrypted planning files tied to the New Dawn operation. When the files were transmitted back to Resolute Dawn and decrypted, the war changed in an instant. Jisoo read the summary in silence. The colony strike had not been a local commander's cruelty. It had been approved at the highest Varex military level. Worse, it had been labeled Phase 1. New Dawn was a test, an extermination rehearsal to study human response time, defense weakness, and political hesitation before a larger campaign against Earth itself. There were target projections for Sol's outer defenses, casualty estimates for Mars, even plans for simultaneous attacks on civilian orbital rings to force panic. Around the command dome, officers stopped as the truth spread from screen to screen. Nari stared at the data with clenched fists. Hannah looked pale with disbelief. The Varex had not just murdered a colony. They had been preparing to butcher humanity. Jisoo closed the file and looked back to the battle, where burning wrecks drifted across Kari's Gate and the first path into enemy space now stood open. "Transmit to all fleet groups," she said, her voice lower than before, colder than before. "The objective has changed. This is no longer retaliation." Every channel across the 700,000 ship armada opened at once. Captains, admirals, pilots, Marines, and drone operators waited. Jisoo spoke clearly so that every human in the war could hear her. New Dawn was the beginning of their plan, not the end. They intended to come for Earth. They intended to kill our people in their homes. From this moment, Operation Iron Horizon escalates to full preemptive war. All military targets in Varex sovereign space are now authorized. We do not stop at the border. We do not stop at their fleets. We stop when they can never do this again. Across the fleet, confirmations lit up like stars. Human engines burned brighter. Ahead of them lay the wounded core of the Varex Dominion, still believing it had time to recover, still not understanding that the line at Kari's Gate had not been the battle that would save them, but the door they had just failed to close. And as the first massive human formations crossed through the wreckage into the heart of enemy territory, every world watching the war began to understand the terrible truth. The galaxy had just witnessed humanity's opening move, and the real storm had only begun. Once the shattered remains of Kari's Gate drifted behind them, the 700,000 warships of Earth moved deeper into Varex space like a steel tide that could no longer be turned back, and for the first time in its long and brutal history, the Varex Dominion began to understand fear. Their border fortresses had fallen too quickly, their first fleets had been broken too cleanly, and the human armada did not slow after victory as many species would have done. It accelerated. Across the black of enemy territory, Earth's formations split into disciplined waves, each one assigned a different purpose. Vanguard assault fleets drove toward military shipyards and command relays. Carrier groups swept around populated worlds to cut off naval traffic without targeting cities. Siege formations struck orbital gun platforms and fortress moons. Electronic warfare ships flooded the Varex network with false signals, forcing enemy fleets to chase ghosts, while real human battle groups moved through dark lanes that should have been impossible to navigate at such scale. At the center of the campaign, aboard the flagship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Jisukong stood beneath the great tactical dome and watched the enemy's inner sectors light up one after another with red warning flares. Commander Nari Cho reported heavy resistance building near the Trion Belt, a mining region converted into a military resupply hub, while Captain Hannah Lim confirmed that Varek's command channels were already fragmenting under the pressure. "They're trying to form a second defensive wall," Hannah said, her fingers moving across floating displays. "But they're pulling ships from occupied systems and slave patrol zones. Their logistics are collapsing." Jisoo studied the map for a long second and then answered with the same calm she had carried since New Dawn. "Good. If they abandon their chains, the galaxy will see what they really are." That truth spread faster than any fleet. As Earth advanced, worlds that had suffered under Varek's rule began to rise. On one ash-gray moon, an enslaved industrial population sabotaged a fuel depot just as a Varek's cruiser group was preparing to jump. On another world, prison camps opened their gates after human marines disabled the orbital control net. Broadcasts from liberated systems showed alien laborers, displaced families, and starving civilians stepping out of guarded compounds to stare at human dropships descending through the clouds. Many had feared that the humans would come as conquerors, that the stories of a massive revenge fleet meant total destruction for anyone in its path, but what they saw instead confused them at first and then slowly changed everything. Human soldiers secured power grids. Medical ships landed in former slave districts. Food packs were distributed before battle damage was even fully cleared. Civilian shelters were marked as protected zones and entered into the fleet AI so that no accidental strike would touch them. Earth was waging war with terrifying force, but it was not waging war like the Vareks. In the Galactic Council capital, that difference was becoming impossible to ignore. Delegates who had once spoken with casual arrogance about human restraint now sat in emergency chambers filled with silent dread as battle feeds poured in from dozens of sectors. Council envoy Sora Bay stood before them again, this time not as a pleading diplomat, but as the representative of a species that had just shattered the old balance of power. Some delegates wanted her to explain Earth's next move. Others wanted to demand an immediate ceasefire. A few, especially those who had quietly traded with the Varek's dominion for years, suddenly acted as if they had always opposed the massacre at New Dawn. But one powerful bloc inside the council still feared something greater than Varek's defeat. They feared what humanity would become if it won. Led by the hard-faced delegate of the Thalen Union, they argued that Earth's fleet size alone was a threat to galactic stability. If humanity is allowed to march unchecked, the Thalen speaker declared, we may exchange one danger for another. The Dominion must be punished, yes, but not annihilated by a power beyond council control. Sora looked at the chamber and saw not justice, but the same old fear wrapped in new language. Council control? She asked quietly. Where was your control when children burned on New Dawn? No one answered. The Thalen delegate instead tried another angle, warning that continued human advance could trigger wider panic and threaten trade across neutral zones. Sora activated a new projection over the chamber. It was not battle footage this time. It was the full archive recovered from the Varek's command carrier, strategic planning files, extermination projections, and target lists for Sol, Mars, Luna, and civilian habitat rings. Entire council worlds were included in later phases, not as allies, but as future subjects once humanity had been removed. Gasps spread through the chamber. Some delegates stared in horror as they saw their own systems marked for political absorption or resource conversion. Others looked sick when they saw casualty estimates for Earth in the billions. This is what your patience protected, Sora said, her voice hard now. This is what your restraint would have allowed. The chamber fractured at once. Smaller species that had long feared the Vareks began openly siding with Earth. Old trade partners of the Dominion turned silent and avoided eye contact. Some delegates demanded emergency sanctions against any council member still supplying Varek's fleets. Others pushed for a joint humanitarian corridor behind the human front lines. For the first time in generations, the Galactic Council was not a united political machine. It was a room full of frightened species choosing sides. Far from the capital, in Varric space, those choices were becoming matters of life and death. The Trian Belt became the next great battlefield, and unlike Kari's Gate, it was not a clean fortress line but a dense region of mining stations, refineries, asteroid yards, and defense satellites woven through a maze of rocks and industrial debris. The Varrics had transformed it into a trap. Thousands of concealed guns were hidden in hollowed asteroids. Minefields drifted under false civilian tags. Ambush cruisers waited in the shadows of refinery towers. As the first human vanguard entered the belt, the trap sprang shut in a storm of fire. 3 Earth destroyers vanished in the opening barrage. A carrier escort lost half its hull to a mine cluster that detonated under the shields. For the first time since Kari's Gate, the human advance slowed. On the bridge of the carrier Hanul Star, Commander Nari Cho watched the ambush unfold across tactical screens and knew the Varrics were trying to do more than inflict losses. They wanted spectacle. They wanted the galaxy to finally see human ships burn. "They want us angry," one officer said. "They want us reckless." Nari's expression did not change. "Then they still don't know us." She launched drone swarms in layered patterns instead of charging forward. Thousands of small craft spread through the asteroid maze, painting hidden weapon signatures and forcing Varric's batteries to reveal themselves. Human rail platforms in the rear began precision fire, cracking open false rocks one by one. Missile destroyers used low-yield penetrators to disable stations without vaporizing trapped workers. Marines deployed into refinery tunnels where Varric's boarding teams had already started executing labor crews to blame the deaths on Earth. In one refinery core, Lieutenant Era Shin led a brutal corridor fight against Varric's shock troops and managed to seal blast doors just before the enemy could vent an entire civilian shelter into space. The battle lasted 11 hours and cost both sides dearly, but by the end of it, the Trian Belt was no longer a trap. It was another broken line, another region of Varric's military strength torn apart by disciplined human force. Yet victory there brought something darker. As more command nodes fell, the human fleet intercepted a flood of emergency transmissions from deeper Varric sectors, and the pattern was clear. The Dominion was becoming desperate. Instead of withdrawing to preserve core worlds, they were burning everything behind them. Shipyards were scuttled before capture. Civilian labor stations were mined and abandoned. Loyalist governors were ordered to execute prisoners rather than allow liberation. Entire populations were being used as shields, hostages, or examples. When the footage reached Earth's command circles and the Council alike, public opinion across the galaxy shifted hard and fast. Refugee convoys from old Varric's border zones began broadcasting pleas directly to the human fleet. Neutral worlds opened hidden supply caches for Earth's forward groups. Even a few former Council critics quietly sent encrypted maps of Varric supply routes, mine grids, and jump corridors. Humanity was no longer seen only as a species seeking revenge. It was becoming something far more dangerous to the old order, a liberating force that people were willing to trust. That made the Council's fear worse. In a sealed emergency session, the Thalen bloc proposed a formal motion to halt Earth by force if necessary. Their argument was simple. If the Varrics collapsed completely, human fleets would dominate the central lanes and no future Council decision would matter without Earth's approval. Some delegates, especially those from old military powers, reluctantly agreed. Others were horrified at the idea of fighting the very armada currently breaking the Dominion. Sora Bay, informed of the motion, sent a secure warning back to Seoul. President Hanul Ryu listened in silence as the message played. Beside him, General Una Park simply said, "Let them try." But Jisoo rejected any immediate confrontation with the Council. "Not yet," she said from the bridge of Resolute Dawn. "Every ship we turn away from the Varrics is another world left to die." Instead, Earth made a different move. The full evidence archive from the Dominion was released to public channels across the galaxy, and censored and undeniable. Civilian extermination orders, planned strikes on Seoul, enslavement rosters, supply agreements with corrupt Council intermediaries. The effect was explosive. Protests erupted on neutral capitals. Trade guilds cut off Varrics-linked shipping. Some council representatives were dragged from office by their own populations. The motion to stop Earth by force did not disappear, but it lost the moral ground it needed. Humanity had turned truth itself into a weapon, and the galaxy was now fighting its own political war behind the fleet lines. But the Variks Dominion still had one move left, and it was the cruelest of all. As human forces closed on the inner sectors, deep scans revealed a terrifying energy signature around the Variks capital system. At first, analysts thought it was a layered defense ring. Then the readings sharpened. It was a stellar destabilizer array, a forbidden doomsday system anchored around the capital star itself. If activated, it could trigger a chain reaction that would not only destroy the Variks home system but also send lethal shock fronts through nearby inhabited sectors, killing billions, including enslaved species and any human fleets caught in range. Worse, intercepted command traffic showed the Variks Supreme Warlord had no intention of surrendering. If Earth reached the capital, he would rather burn half the region than let humanity claim victory. The news spread through the fleet like ice. On the bridge, Hannah Lim read the estimates twice before speaking. If he triggers it at full charge, the blast radius reaches 3 neighboring systems. Refugee worlds, labor worlds, maybe even our forward siege groups. Jisoo looked at the map and understood the truth at once. The final campaign would not just be a battle for revenge. It would be a race against annihilation. Before she could issue the next wave of orders, another emergency report came in from the front line near the Yaris corridor. A human relief convoy carrying medics, fuel, and shelter modules for liberated worlds had been ambushed by Variks raiders using civilian transponder masks. Captain Du Yoon, still commanding the battered cruiser Iron Veil after Kari's Gate, was nearest. Without waiting for reinforcement, he turned his damaged ship back into the corridor to cover the convoy's escape. The Variks had hidden heavy torpedo batteries in the debris fields, and Iron Veil took the full hit. The shields failed. Fires tore through 3 decks. Secondary engines died. But Du Yoon held position anyway, placing his cruiser between the raiders and the helpless convoy. He fired until his forward guns melted. He launched his last fighters with manual commands when the flight control AI failed. When the enemy finally tried to pass, he ordered a direct collision burn and rammed Iron Veil into the lead raider carrier, tearing both ships apart in a flash that lit the corridor like a small sun. The convoy escaped. Across the fleet, his final transmission played through static and flame. Keep them moving. Save the living. On Resolute Dawn, no one spoke for several seconds after the channel died. Nari lowered her head. Hannah wiped at one eye and returned to her console. Jisoo stood straighter, the grief hidden but not gone. The fleet did not stop. Could not stop. Du Yun's sacrifice became the emotional fire that hardened every heart in the armada. If the Variks wanted terror, they would find that humanity understood it better than they ever imagined. Orders moved out at once. Assault groups were reorganized for maximum speed. Deep scouts were sent ahead to map the destabilizer array. Marine strike teams prepared for infiltration operations. Siege fleets changed course toward the capital lanes. In the council capital, Sora Bay watched the new star map bloom red around the Variks home system and realized the war had entered its last and most dangerous phase. Behind the human fleet, liberated worlds lit memorial beacons for New Dawn and for Iron Veil. Ahead of the fleet, a desperate empire armed its final weapon. And as 700,000 warships drove through burning sectors toward the enemy heart, the galaxy understood at last that the coming battle would decide more than the fate of one empire. It would decide whether humanity would be remembered as avengers, liberators, or the last shield standing between civilization and the madness of those who believed they could burn the stars rather than face justice. As the 700,000 warships of Earth entered the final approach lanes to the Variks capital system, the galaxy held its breath, because every sensor network, every hidden observer, every frightened council world, and every liberated colony knew that what was about to happen would become the greatest battle in recorded history. The capital star of the Dominion burned at the center of a fortress system built over centuries, wrapped in rings of defense platforms, mine moons, orbital bastions, shield lattices, and fleets so dense they looked like black scars around the light. But now all of it was armed not just for defense, but for death. Around the star itself, the forbidden stellar destabilizer array glowed in long crimson arcs, its energy nodes anchored to massive platforms buried in the inner orbital rings. If the Varric Supreme Warlord activated it fully, the capital would die, the neighboring systems would be scorched, and billions Varric civilians, enslaved populations, refugees, and human assault groups alike would vanish in a chain of fire. A lesser fleet would have paused. A lesser species would have demanded surrender and waited for diplomacy to fail. Earth did neither. Aboard the flagship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Jisoo Kong stood beneath the tactical dome as the entire capital system unfolded in layers before her. Every gun, every ship cluster, every defense ring marked in cold light. Commander Nari Cho had already deployed her carriers into wide assault arcs. Captain Hannah Lim was coordinating encrypted strike channels across more ships than any single commander in galactic history had ever controlled. President Hanul Ryu and General Yuna Park watched from Earth through secure relay, but they did not interfere. The fleet was now in Jisoo's hands. She looked at the glowing marker of the destabilizer array, then at the remains of New Dawn still pinned in a corner of the star map as a permanent reminder. "Begin phase final," she said, her voice low and absolute. For New Dawn, the human armada moved at once, not in one blunt wave, but in layered storms designed to break the impossible. Vanguard destroyer groups surged forward first, releasing millions of decoy drones and electronic ghosts that spread across the outer defense ring like a false second fleet. Varric sensors lit up in confusion, seeing phantom battleships and fake warp signatures at every angle. Before they could adjust, human missile barges opened fire from extreme range, unleashing a barrage so vast that the darkness itself seemed to ignite. Thousands upon thousands of heavy warheads screamed across the void, wrapped in chaff clouds and shield disruptors. The outer defense platforms answered with walls of plasma, cutting through many of the missiles, but there were too many, and behind the missiles came the railgun volleys. Human dreadnoughts fired in synchronized chains, their kinetic rounds punching through defense bastions, mine moons, and orbital gun towers with terrifying precision. One moon-sized weapons platform cracked open under repeated hits and burst into a cloud of molten debris that rained through the lower ring. Yet the Varrics were not broken so easily. Their capital fleets launched in full strength, hundreds of capital ships surging from behind shield layers, flanked by swarms of assault craft and suicide interceptors. The void between the two civilizations became a burning sea. Human escorts vanished under concentrated fire. Varric's cruisers were split by rail impacts. Carrier swarms tangled in lethal storms of flak and plasma. The largest battle in history became chaos on a scale that defied thought, but even inside that chaos, Earth kept its shape. Nari Cho's carriers flowed like a living mind, launching drone walls to absorb enemy fire, while human strike wings slipped through the gaps. Siege groups rotated positions with machine-like discipline. Damaged ships fell back under escort while fresh lines replaced them before the enemy could exploit a breach. At the heart of the Varric's defense, 3 colossal fortress ships moved to block the main approach to the inner ring, each one bristling with enough guns to cripple an assault group. Jisoo watched them for 2 seconds, then gave a new order. Open the corridor. Across the front, human battleships shifted aside in a pattern so precise it looked rehearsed for years, because it had been. From deep behind the main battle line, 12 spinal siege platforms emerged, led by the Silent Hammer. Their reactors flared, their weapons aligned. Then they fired together. Blue-white beams lanced across the battlefield and struck the fortress ships in the same instant. Shields burst. Armor peeled open. One fortress ship exploded outright. A second drifted, burning and dead. The third, crippled but still moving, tried to ram into the human line before Captain Mira Song, commanding the battleship Winter Sky, drove straight into its path and unloaded every forward battery at point-blank range. The alien giant broke apart less than a kilometer from her bow, showering Winter Sky with fire and metal. "Path is open," Mira reported through static, as calm as if she were reporting weather. But the true battle was not the fleet. It was the star. As human assault forces pushed into the inner rings, the destabilizer array began charging faster. Crimson energy flared around the capital star, and every ship in the system felt the pressure through their hulls. Hannah's face went pale as she read the new energy curves. "He's accelerating the cycle," she said. "Full ignition in under 20 minutes. Jisoo did not hesitate. "Deploy Ghost Spear." That order sent the war's most dangerous mission into motion. Hidden among the battle traffic, a compact strike group broke formation and plunged toward the inner array nodes. 2 stealth corvettes, 1 marine breach ship, and a small escort wing led by Lieutenant Era Shin, the same officer who had taken the Varex command vault at Kari's Gate. With her was a hand-picked team of human marines, engineers, and slicers, including combat tech Uniseo and breacher Tae-jin, each one knowing that if they failed, the whole system could die. Their target was the primary control node buried inside a rotating command citadel anchored close to the destabilizer core. Reaching it meant crossing overlapping defense fire, dodging debris fields, and surviving automated kill satellites that could slice corvettes apart in seconds. Era's group flew anyway. Their stealth coatings burned under radiation. 1 escort vanished in a beam strike. Another spun away with half its engines gone. But the breach ship made contact with the Citadel hull and punched through with shaped charges, cutting a hole into a corridor lit by emergency red. Inside, the fight turned savage and close. Varex shock guards met them in heavy armor, firing at point-blank range through smoke and flashing alarms. Tae-jin blew 1 barricade apart with breaching foam and grenades. Yuna sliced into internal security doors while plasma fire scarred the walls around her. Era led from the front, moving through corridor after corridor, losing Marines at each turn, but never slowing. Outside, the fleet battle grew even worse. The Varex Supreme Warlord, realizing the human objective, committed his reserve fleet at last. Elite guard squadrons and ancient battleships held back until this moment. They slammed into Earth's central lanes with suicidal fury. Human losses spiked. Entire destroyer screens vanished. A carrier group on Nari's right flank was torn open by concentrated torpedoes. 1 dreadnought lost power and drifted into the line of fire. For the first time, the human advance risked stalling. Jisoo saw it happen in real time and made the kind of decision that turned commanders into legends or ghosts. She ordered the 2nd and 3rd reserve walls. Tens of thousands of ships Earth had kept back for prolonged war, to commit everything now. "No later," she said. "There is only now." The capital system lit brighter as fresh human formations surged forward in impossible numbers, smashing into the reserve Varex fleets with a force that broke their momentum. On the left flank, Nari personally led a deep strike through burning wreckage to destroy a cluster of torpedo carriers before they could reload. On the right, Mirasong's damaged Winter Sky anchored a collapsing corridor long enough for medships and disabled cruisers to escape. Across the whole system, human voices carried the same phrase through command channels, from admirals to fighter pilots to marines in blood-filled hallways. For New Dawn. In the inner citadel, Era Shin's team reached the primary control chamber just as the destabilizer cycle crossed the critical threshold. The room was enormous, built around a glowing core shaft that pulsed with red light like the heartbeat of a dying star. At its center stood the Varex Warlord's chief systems overseer and a final ring of elite guards. The battle there was short, brutal, and desperate. Tae-jin fell taking a plasma bolt meant for Yuna. 2 Marines died covering the central console. Era fought through the last guard and drove her blade through the overseer before he could trigger the final lock. "Cut it!" she shouted. Yuna threw herself into the console, hands moving through alien code with human override spikes and raw fury. Outside the chamber walls, the whole station groaned as the star's energy surged. On resolute dawn, Hannah counted down the ignition window in a shaking voice. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Then Yuna screamed as sparks and blood flew from the console. She drove the override through, bypassed the failsafe, and severed the main synchronization chain 1 second before final ignition. Across the system, the red arcs around the star flickered, destabilized, and collapsed into harmless fragments of light. The capital sun flared once and then settled. A silence passed through every ship, every command channel, every observer in the galaxy. Then the human fleet surged with renewed fury. The doomsday threat was gone. The warlord had lost his last shield. Jisoo saw the opening and gave the final order. "All fleets, break the throne." Human assault groups drove through the shattered inner ring and converged on the Varex command citadel and the warlord's flagship, a vast black dreadnought hanging above the capital world like a blade. It fought savagely, firing until half its guns were torn away, launching fighter swarms even as its escorts died around it. But now the Varex line was breaking everywhere. Without the destabilizer, without the reserve fleets, without hope, the system began to collapse. Human marines boarded the flagship under cover of drone storms. Fleet guns pounded its engines. Nari's carriers stripped its shields. A final railgun strike from Silent Hammer cored its central spine. The great ship went dark. Inside, the Supreme Warlord tried to flee through a command shuttle and was captured alive by Era Shin's surviving team, dragged from the smoke and ruin of his own bridge while his empire died around him. By the time the last Varex warships began transmitting surrender codes, the battle was over. The largest naval war in history had ended not with extermination, but with total defeat. In the days that followed, the galaxy watched in disbelief as Earth did what no one expected. Human fleets did not glass the Varex homeworld. They did not wipe out the species that had murdered New Dawn. Instead, military zones were occupied, weapons were seized, prison worlds were opened, and war criminals were placed under armed tribunal. The Supreme Warlord was put in chains. Enslaved populations across former Dominion space were freed. Emergency relief convoys landed on worlds that had feared human revenge and found human medics instead. The Galactic Council, shaken to its core and stripped of its old lies, was forced to reform under new oversight, with liberated species given voices for the first time and secret military blocks exposed. On Earth, memorial lights burned for New Dawn, for Iron Veil, for Taejin, for the Marines who never came back, and for every soul lost before the war ever truly began. Months later, on the ashes of the destroyed colony, reconstruction ships descended through a quiet sky. New homes rose where ruins had once stood. A new relay tower was built at the heart of the settlement, stronger than the last. Beside it stood a memorial wall engraved with the names of the dead. Mira Han's final transmission was carved into its base. The child's question was preserved forever. Did Earth hear us? And beneath it, written in steel for every visitor to read, were the words that the whole galaxy now understood. Earth heard, Earth came, and when the stars were tested by cruelty, humanity answered not as monsters, but as the force that ended an empire and taught the galaxy that the greatest mistake any enemy could make was to believe that destroying one human colony would make Earth afraid, when all it truly did was awaken a civilization that had spent centuries preparing to make sure such a crime could never happen again.